Hey, Pastor Josh here. We're reading Acts chapter 23, verses 16 through 22. And as you remember, the Apostle Paul's in some trouble. There are 40 guys that have made a vow that they would be cursed if they did not kill the Apostle Paul. They said, unless we kill the Apostle Paul, we will not eat. And if we don't get this done, we are cursed ourselves. And what we're going to see is that God providentially protects the Apostle Paul. God's providential protection. This is a fancy word, providence. It's a fancy word of God working behind the scenes for our protection. And indeed, this is what he does for the Apostle Paul. So let's see what happens. Now, the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush. He heard. It was just happened that Paul's nephew heard about this ambush that was going to happen. And do you think it was just happen chance? Do you think it was just an accident that it was Paul's nephew that heard about this ambush? Of course not. It was the Lord working behind the scenes, providing his providential protection. He did it with the tribune, and he's doing it again through the Apostle Paul's nephew. Now, we don't have much knowledge of the Apostle Paul's family, so here's a instance and a story of the Apostle Paul's family. And we see that that his nephew is going to be instrumental in saving his life. And ultimately is because the Lord was working behind the scenes. And don't you think the Lord might be working behind the scenes for your own good? Of course he is. That's what he does. So he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Notice, though, even though the Lord is definitely working behind the scenes and allowed Paul's nephew to hear about the story, he acted on it. He went into the barracks and he told Paul. And then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." Again, we have seen this in the past with the Apostle Paul, that he is not just desirous to be a martyr for no reason. If he has a way to avoid pain, he's going to do it. If he's going to find a way to avoid punishment, he's going to do it. It's not that he's not afraid to suffer for Christ. We know for sure if anybody was willing to suffer for Jesus Christ, it was the Apostle Paul. But he does take advantage of the opportunities to bring protection for himself. So he calls the centurion and says, "Hey, take my boy, take my nephew, and take him up to the tribune. He's got something to tell him." Fascinating that the centurions listen to him. There's some sort of respect that they have of the Apostle Paul. It's probably the way that he's treating them. It's probably the way that he is talking to them. They respect him so much that they say, "Okay, we're going to take him to the tribune." So he took him, brought him to the tribune, and said, "Paul the prisoner," don't you like that alliteration? "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you." Paul is going to be a prisoner for the rest of the book of Acts. In fact, the book of Acts closes with Paul as a prisoner. There is no happy ending, if you will, to the book of Acts. He is in prison in Rome and under house arrest, having encounters with the Jewish believers there in Rome, and then also the Jewish leadership that does not believe in Jesus. He has interaction. Of course, he is there proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. So the centurion goes to the tribune and says, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand and, going aside, asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me? What is it?" "Well, what is it? What's Paul the prisoner want to say?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him." Now, I do find it interesting that Luke gives us the speech again. Again, if you remember when I've said that there are, whenever things seem to be repeated, you can kind of take it as a cosmic highlighter, God underlining and saying, "Pay attention to this." So Luke doesn't tell us Paul's nephew's name, which I'd be interested to know. What's Paul's nephew's name? What's his sister's name? I'd like to know these people. It just says it's just his sister, just his nephew. And yet we know what the Jews have agreed to do. And he is going to tell us again. Again, the highlighting of God, what Luke wants us to hear, what the Lord wants us to hear, is that there is an attack on the gospel by attacking the Apostle Paul. And even it's such a major attack, that it is that they are seeking to take the apostles' life. That's what the focus is on, not some of the details that we're interested in. What's Paul's nephew? Who is this guy? Who's his sister? What were they like? Did they have a good relationship? Did they get along? Did Paul pick on her when they were little? We don't know, because that's not the point of the passage. The point of the passage is to tell us the gospel is being threatened. And in fact, if these guys would have killed the Apostle Paul, we would have not had the book of Ephesians. We would have not had, more than likely, the book of Philippians. We would have not had the book of 1st and 2nd Timothy. Some powerful words were written by the Apostle Paul while he was in prison after he left this place. But then he goes on to say, but do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are laying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath, neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. So he's saying, don't be persuaded. Here's an example for us to follow when the Lord is working behind the scenes. He gives us information. It's okay for us to act on it. It is okay. God is providentially working behind the scenes, and then we need to make sure that we are good, smart, intelligent people to respond with the information that we have. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent. So the tribune dismissed the young man and charging him said, tell no one that you have informed me of these things. So the tribune is again going to save the Apostle Paul, and we'll see how that all turns out in our next reading. Always remember that the Lord is always working behind the scenes for our good as Christians. I pray that has been a blessing to you, and I'll see you all in the next video.